All right, so what I'd like to do now is just kind of ask you some questions. Is if we could walk through and just really isolate out each section of the grid that you've made here. The first one is fluency, and you touched on this earlier when I first heard you talk about this, and then it was a while before I started kind of to think about it again. I really thought in my mind, well, fluency is probably the bottom of Bloom's taxonomy. But then as I got, maybe lower level thinking, as I looked at your book a little bit more, I realized that you were talking about how fluency can be a lot of things, and what it's anything. I suppose that I think the words you used, we want to try to build automaticity with habits we want to make automatic,
Mhm.
and you talked about something. It was maybe as a literature person or as an English teacher, you were talking about how that ability to synthesize, which I think is even as an adult, is something sometimes we have to strive for. It doesn't always just happen automatically. But you were explaining that that is something that as teachers, an English teacher, you should be striving to make automatic. So I was just wondering if in general, if you could share
Yeah.
with us some just different ways that we could think of, and even just general ways we could think of this quadrant of fluency. What kinds of things are we trying to install in our students' minds there?
Awesome. Well, I like the three words you used. It's fluency, automaticity, or a habit. So depending on, how much research world or popular press, it's that idea that you do it with great automaticity, great fluency. And so when you're first learning to read, you have to learn to recognize the letters. At some point, you start blending sounds, and it becomes increasingly automatic. And then your brain's ready for the next. So the whole idea is to free up working memory so your brain can do the next. So if I think about calculus, what fluent behaviors would students need to actually engage in calculus? So I watched a lesson yesterday online with one of our teachers, and she was talking a trig and cosine and all this stuff. And the students, to get that knowledge, which was their struggle, had to use a bunch of their fluent behaviors. You couldn't go all the way back to algebraic thinking and things like that. They already had that fluent behavior, those automaticity parts there to be introduced to the new stuff. So I think of fluency as things that we use that are already under our control that help us with the next stuff. So one of the examples I give that I think really works for my mind is a lot of people take notes. Grown-ups, they go to a workshop or whatever, they take notes. Some like to take electronic notes, some like paper pencil notes, some do graphic visual notes, some use Cornell notes, some use outlining. It doesn't matter. They have developed their habit for note taking. For that person, that adult, note taking is a low difficulty, low complexity task, but it is not an unimportant task. And they probably will use those notes later to review or to share or whatever. And that's how I think we have to think about these fluency tasks. They are tasks that are within our regular habits that we use in service of something else. And so in online environments, we're always activating fluent behavior. We can't go backwards in time. So let's say you have to figure out a math problem about it's a percentage problem on tax. So you're going to buy this thing and there's some tax. What's the total price? There's some of those things that should be automatic for the learner by the time they get to that kind of problem. And there's some of the things that are more procedural that they've gotten. And the idea that you can reflect on your answer, determine it's reasonable, is a behavior that can be in the fluency realm. Some students don't check their answers to see if they're reasonable. They don't have that reflection yet. So we have to remind them of that because they're not yet fluent with that aspect of it. So the whole idea around fluency is to have kids practicing things that they can already do in service of the next thing. So we're learning something new, but we're using these things, these habits that we've already developed.
Good example. I'm thankful you brought in a math example because I'm not a math person. I'm a social studies guy, and I want to throw the math people some bones. So I think that helps a little bit.
Yeah.
To illustrate, I think of like, I still know my a squared plus b squared equals c squared or Chief SOHCAHTOA to get me through some of the sine and cosine equations. I've still got them.